think it's very timely to dealing with the media for those folks who may have seen some articles in the news this weekend. Since last week, I know the Back Bay National Wildlife Refuge was doing some prescribed burning. And then a couple of days later, there was some wildfire activity in that area. And there were several articles in the news trying to differentiate between the two and let folks know that the current fires were not related to the prescribed fires. It's always a big challenge that we have. So with that, Kelly, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I look forward to your presentation on working with the media.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everybody. So this presentation is going to be about 30 minutes long, and I'll kind of get into the structure of it in just a second. But we're going to do about 20 minutes of me going over some materials and then leaving about 10 minutes for questions. But I just wanted to say at the start of this, if anybody does have any questions as I'm walking through any of this or wants to stop and dive a little bit deeper, just let me know. I'm happy to do that. Okay, so a little bit about me. Okay. So as Fred said, my name is Kelly Galoni. I'm the Media Relations Manager for the Nature Conservancy's Virginia chapter. This lovely photo was taken by my colleague, Nicole Simmons, last spring. It was one of my first prescribed burns that I'd been on. I got my red card certification back in January of 2020. So I'm trained more in communications and marketing, media relations, all of that. But the prescribed fire world has been completely new to me since I started at TNC a little over 3 years ago. It was something that I got really excited about from the first time that Sam Lindblom walked me around Piney Grove Preserve, learning about longleaf pine and everything like that, and have since got my certification and just try to dive in as much as possible. So that's why there's a big smile on my face. I'm sure many of you can probably relate to that. So going through this presentation on what we're going to cover. So I kind of have broken this up into 3 different parts and structured it so that we can walk through each of them. And then we'll do questions at the end. But again, if anybody has any questions in the meantime, feel free to stop me. But what we're going to cover this morning, first, the role of media in the fire world. So Fred talked a little bit about it, right? Every now and then you see stories about fire that are covered in newspapers or on the TV, or you might hear about it on the radio. The media has a really big role in how the public perceives fire. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit. The second thing is the role of PIOs and media relations professionals. Contrary to maybe some people's belief about, oh, you just show up on the fire line and have a reporter with you. There's a lot that goes into it ahead of getting somebody actually out on a fire and ready to tell a story about it. So I'm going to walk through that just a little bit. And then the third thing is just things to keep in mind when talking to the media. So if somebody puts you in touch with a reporter or journalist, whether it's on the fire line or someplace else virtually, just some things to keep in mind from their end. I do want to say that all of this, when you do a media training, it can be like multiple days long. So we're fitting a lot into about 20 minutes. But again, this is really just to serve as a quick snapshot for those of you who may have not worked with the media before or have seen it in action, but don't quite know what the behind the scenes has looked like. Okay, so going into our first one, the role of media in the world of fire. So all of us are familiar with newspapers and news stations on the TV and our radio stations. And there's a lot of information that's constantly being served to us through those platforms and through different outlets that tell different stories and kind of put these real world things that are happening into greater context for us. The role of media in the world of fire is really, really, really important because one, you're reaching so many more people through those stories than you would if you just put something up on social media or told people about what you're working on in the community. It has such a further reach. And there's something to be said about somebody who's completely disconnected from the fire world telling a story about the work that you're doing, right? It adds a different level to it where it almost feels a little bit like they're going to be telling it from a more neutral lens than somebody like maybe the Nature Conservancy telling stories about fire. You would expect them to be positive when it comes to prescribed burning. And so again, they can play, these reporters and journalists can play a really powerful role when it comes to especially getting community buy-in and helping people understand when they see black trees for a little while, or if they see smoke in the air, what that means and the story behind it and why that work is so important. I'm going to show really quickly, these are just two stories that have happened in the past couple of years in Virginia that have been really, really positive. I'm just going to read the headlines really quickly. So Virginia's founding forest was decimated. Now the longleaf pine is making a comeback. And then fire was once the forester's enemy. Now it's a tool for regenerating Appalachia's forests. And again, these headlines are very powerful. And anybody who's reading it, even if they're not going through the entire story, the headline kind of tells a story in and of itself, and puts fire on the map and gets people more familiar with seeing this type of work and understanding why it's so important, especially to places like Virginia. So this next section that I just wanted to go through, I think oftentimes the roles of PIOs and media relations professionals and communications staff, it's so behind the scenes that it almost, you're kind of like, what's going on back there? Like, what goes into getting a reporter out on the fire line with us and getting them prepared for that? And what I want to convince you all of today, especially those of you who haven't worked with these types of professionals before, is that there is a lot of work that goes into it. So the starting thing that happens is most PIOs and every media relations professional has a ton of relationships, very strong relationships with these reporters and editors and journalists that they're working with. And so much of this industry is based off of good relationships, right? Like you want to trust the person that you're bringing out to tell your story, and you want to make sure that they're going to do that story justice. And so that's the first thing. And that is like years building type of thing, right? Like you're working with reporters on different stories for many, many years, and over that time building that trust with them. The second thing that we do, so if we're saying, fire season is coming up and we want to get some stories out there about the work that we're doing, everybody has kind of a different way about going about figuring out what their story is and what they're trying to tell. The way that I like to start all of these conversations with my colleagues, whether it has to do with fire or any of the other stories about biodiversity or land protection that we want to tell, is starting with the headline. So if you had your most perfect headline that appeared on the front page of the most perfect paper, what would that headline be? And that way it's really forcing you kind of to boil down what it is that you're trying to say in just a few words. And then you can kind of work backwards from there and figuring out, okay, if this is the headline that we want, here are the types of spokespeople that we might want to talk about this, or here are the types of outlets that might be best to get this story into. Other things that go into our jobs to make sure that these stories are successful is thinking about the audience that we're trying to reach. So if we're doing burning at Piney Grove Preserve down in Southeast Virginia, we might not, while some people might measure success and say, oh, a story in the Washington Post is like the best thing ever. Maybe for that type of thing, getting a more local story is actually more impactful than having something that has like a much larger reach. If you're trying to reach that smaller community and helping them understand why they're seeing fire in the places that they are. And so there's a lot of, again, like strategizing and figuring out, like, it's almost like a game of chess. Like this is the end goal. How do you move the pieces around in order to get as strong of a result as possible? So starting with the headline, like I said, figuring out what it is that we're trying to say. Why are we telling this story? Figuring out the most strategic reporters and outlets to put that story out there. And again, relying on relationships that we've already built. And then identifying main spokespeople for the story and making sure that those spokespeople are completely prepared with talking points. They know the story that we're trying to tell. They're able to talk about it really concisely, especially when it comes to telling a story with like a TV reporter or a radio reporter, you want to have really concise sentences so that it sounds really strong when it comes through in those formats. So that's just, I just wanted to put that out there because, again, anybody can talk to the media. They're very friendly most of the time, but there is a lot of work that goes behind the scenes into making those stories, like we just saw, those headlines, a big success, and making sure that, you know, the story doesn't take a wrong turn somewhere. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure that you all can focus on your jobs, and we're kind of the ones that are handling all the logistics and the behind the scenes to ensure a successful story. So this next one, so things to keep in mind when talking to the media. I'm going to start this one just by saying, kind of hopefully getting rid of a thought that might be in some people's minds. I've worked with some people who say like, oh, I'm like nervous about sounding really bad or sounding like I don't know what I'm talking about. And I just want to put out there that that a reporter is doing themselves a disservice if they make their sources sound unintelligent or like they don't know what they're talking about. So different journalists and reporters, when they go out to a story or working on a story, what they're trying to do is find the very best people that they can to really convey what it is that they're trying to in the story, right? And if you have a reporter working for like a TV station or a radio station in particular that is telling this story, and they come out with different sound bites from a person's interview that make them sound really unintelligent, it makes their story sound like, oh, you just couldn't find a good source. And so there's no reason why they would want you to sound like you don't know what you're talking about. And I say that because, again, it can be really nerve-wracking, especially the first time talking to a reporter, but just keeping in mind that they're on your team, like they're talking to you for a reason. You're the professional and the expert that they need to make their story a success. And so I just wanted, again, that's normally something that comes up frequently during interviews and when we have media out on the fire line. And I wanted to try to make sure you all know that they really are on your team when they're out there, because our PIOs and media relations professionals have done the work to make them, invested in the story and wanting to tell a good one. Some other things, again, this section could end up being multiple days long, of like how to stand and all these types of things. But one other important piece to keep in mind. So typically journalists kind of fall into three categories. There's like written journalism, like newspaper articles, things online that you might see. There's radio, and then there's TV, and all of those have different components to them. I think the easiest one to work with is people who are writing their stories, right? Because you can just kind of walk around with them and, give them, good visuals to get photos of and things like that. But most of what they're collecting, they're just like jotting down notes the whole time. They might sometimes bring out a phone or something to record what you're saying. But most of the time it's a little bit more organic and, just trying to capture the feel of the day and what's going on there. Radio and TV is just a little bit different, where obviously with radio, you have just your voice. So there's going to be actual interviews happening where you're going to have a microphone attached to you. You're going to have to be standing in a really, really quiet spot so that it doesn't pick up extra sound. And then with TV, you have all of that plus the added component of your face being recorded and captured. And so one thing that I've seen happen quite frequently, not just on the fire line, but in other situations as well, is when it's radio and TV reporters that are out working on a story, typically you'll have them interviewing somebody and there might be some other people kind of mingling about and talking and things like that. And that's kind of a huge, that's like a big no. So when you have somebody that's recorded, like capturing sound and images and things like that, it's really important to be in as quiet of a spot as possible, and for everybody else around there to be as quiet as possible, because what could end up happening, say you're watching your colleague give a really, really awesome interview, and you're, crinkling a candy wrapper or talking, like whispering to somebody. their microphone is going to pick all of that up, and then it's going to make all of that footage or audio completely unusable. And so it could be that your colleague said something like a really, really great soundbite that would have sounded so good in the story, but then it's kind of wasted because people around are, rustling around or talking. So that's really important to keep in mind, and just also to keep reporters that are out there and spending their day telling that story happy, because we try to keep them as happy as we possibly can so that they keep telling these good stories. And those are kind of the main things that I wanted to touch on. I'm about 5 minutes early. So there's a lot of room for questions, which is great. And I'm happy to take them. And I hope that you all have some, because again, I know everybody in this group is at different levels when it comes to understanding the media and the role of PIOs and media relations and how to tell these good stories. And so what I was trying to do with this presentation is give as much of an all-encompassing look at this as possible, but again, just recognizing that it's a very, very tiny snapshot. One thing that before we take questions that I'll mention too that would be good for people on this call to know is that there's actually a really great effort underway right now between all of the different agencies and TNC, like everybody that's on this call, basically, if you have a PIO or communications person on your team that helps you tell stories about fire, there's a group of us that have started convening. It's kind of a cross between the Fire Learning Network and then the Virginia Prescribed Fire Council. But basically all of us have started coming together and having these regular meetings to talk about like which stories we're working on, developing communal talking points, figuring out how to capture good photos that all of us can use and share. So just having a little bit more collaboration there so that we're not working in these like siloed areas on the same basic type of story. So that's really exciting. It's in the very beginning stages, but it's better to tell stories together than it is individually. So yeah. Any questions?
Thank you, Kelly. And before see if any other questions show up in the chat, I'd like to couple points I just want to bring up. Is that, it's everybody's role, and we have an opportunity, whether we're a individual landowner doing a burn, or we have, we're not part of a state or federal agency or large organization. When we're out there burning, we have that opportunity to get that message, delivered. And as a key component of the council is education and information, and we can't do it ourselves. Each of us as individuals, Kelly can't do it herself for her agency. So we need to involve the media. But I couldn't help but laugh to myself, Kelly, when you were talking about, think of that perfect headline and then figure out how you're going to deliver it. I can remember many years ago, we were coming out of a spring fire season, going into a busy summer prescribed burning season. And I thought it would be good to get some media coverage out there on, one time we're talking about these wildfires that we need to deal with because they're serious and they're and then, a couple weeks later, we're going to be talking about prescribed fires. So just trying to get that message delivered. And the headline, the picture in the paper and the headline was a picture of a drip torch from ground level. And behind it was a fire whirl that had come across the line. And the headline was, "We're not in Kansas anymore." That wasn't quite the message I was wanting to get out there, but and what that comes to, and Kelly mentioned it, and I think it's very important, is relationships with the media. Build them before you need them. Again, and it could be individuals, landowners, or small organizations. Reach out to your local media folks that you may know them from just in your community or not. But yes, let's see what questions may have come up while we were chit-chatting a little bit. Great presentation. Today's world, a quick reaction. Yeah. You can see these just as well as I can, Kelly. I don't know if you want to address any of them.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realize I could pull this up.
She was, one of the questions was, it was very interesting that last, you talked about the group coming together to leverage each other's strengths. Is there a name or is there a way that other folks can join that group?
Yeah, so I'm going to put, here's my email address. And then there's Sam Lopez is also involved in organizing that group. There's a few of us, but if it's easier, if Sam, you want to put your email in there, whichever way, Sam or I would be great to reach out to. We can make sure that your people are connected.
Okay, cool. Yeah, lots of interest in that joint coordination communication project. I always thought that, one message, many voices is a way to get things across and stuff. So I'm glad we're.
And we definitely want to make sure to, when it comes to communicating across, there's so many of us, right? Like this is a big group of people that are working towards common goals, and just making sure that our messaging is as aligned as possible so that we're not unintentionally saying something that kind of cuts down the work of another group or another area or something like that. Like it can get really tricky really fast when that happens. And that's one of the reasons why it's been great to work with other communicators in the state who are thinking about these same things, just to make sure that, we're working off of the same talking points. And when we're, if I'm working on a story about fire that involves our partners at DCR, DWR, whoever, that we're making sure that we're all kind of sticking with the same general story, even if it's slightly different.
And there's a statement that, are you guys tied in with the Fish and Wildlife Service, PIOs? I think the invites went out to all the groups and such. I'm not sure if you have a rep currently. I know sometimes Fish and Wildlife Service here in Virginia, they're kind of strapped for personnel. So I don't know if they have somebody dedicated or not yet.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Sam, I don't know if you know. I'm still getting to know everybody. We've only had about 3 calls, and I can't remember if we do have somebody from there or not.
I'm not aware of anybody.
Yeah.
Hopefully maybe somebody on this call is, but yeah, they're definitely a player, as some of the big users of fire here in the state. So they're very instrumental in the council. So
yeah.
Okay.
Hold on, Sam wants me to unmute her. Hold on, Sam. If you raise your hand, it's a lot easier for me to find y'all too, by the way, if you want to unmute. There you go.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. No, we did not invite wildlife because originally this effort was made through the Heart of the Appalachian FLN. Not to say that they cannot be added. It's just we were trying to start a messaging kind of over in the western side of Virginia, all of that group together. So that's why it's kind of been specifically to the west, just because that's where this effort started, was in the HOA FLN. I've already got a couple of names here that I'm seeing in the chat that I need to add. So please, anybody else interested, email me and I will include you. Jean, I've got you as well. Steve Living, Ashley, I saw, and Laurel. I all have you on my list of people to add. I just need some emails. If we think we need to go west and add Fish and Wildlife Service, we can do that. That just wasn't the original intent. That's all.
Yeah, and to just clarify too, kind of along the same lines of what Sam was saying, the FLN and their strategic plan decided that it would be good to bring communicators together, and so that's been going really great. And again, we just got started, but then there was kind of this idea of like, well, communicate, like from our perspective, I guess, as a communicator, fire is fire, whether it's in the eastern part of the state or the western part of the state. The messaging is a little bit different, but it still is working with similar colleagues. And so that's when we wanted to start thinking about, like, is there some way to kind of combine these communications groups just to not duplicate efforts, basically, since there was a need in the eastern part of the state as well.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good role for the council, to be the conduit between the Fire Learning Network and your initial, development of that communications group to, carry it statewide through whether it's the Park Service, folks out of Shenandoah, or Fish and Wildlife Service, or a lot of the Back Bay areas, like I said, a lot of the eastern Tidewater areas where there's a lot of burning done. So again, that could be a good role of the council to be that conduit. So, okay, any other, lots of information in the chat. And like I said, we're going to be capturing that too. So we'll try to respond back to everybody. So, but thank you so much, Kelly. I really appreciate your insight on some things.
Definitely.
And it was, like you said, it was difficult to take something that is as involved in working with the media, because it doesn't happen. You got to work at it, like you said. So let's all work at it together. And thanks for being part of it, Kelly.
Absolutely. Thank you. And if anybody has any other questions, again, my email is there, and I can send it out afterwards too, but I'm happy to make media relations seem a little less scary if anybody's feeling a little scared by it. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you so much.